Every year, around the Christmas holiday, magical things always seem to happen. Some things are marvelous and joyful, like visits from Santa or a snowman coming alive. Many people say they can feel the Christmas magic in the air or around them. Some things aren't so joyful. Around Christmas every year, kidnappings, murder, and suicide rates go up drastically as well. Even when horrid things like this happen, people often feel, yet rarely do they admit, they still have a kind of holiday magic behind it, although it can be a dark magic. One example comes from a Christmas demon known as the Krampus. The Krampus is well known in countries like Germany and Switzerland for taking naughty children in the dead of Christmas Eve night. Here's one such account. December 6, 2013. My name is Eli Rockford. I'm currently 7 years old as I write this. I confide in this journal something I can't tell my family because they would never believe me. I am often told that I am very smart for my age, because I say and do things that most kids my age don't. But if I tell a strange story, no matter how hard I get them to believe me, my parents and siblings say it's just my imagination. Today I looked out my window into the street by our house and saw a man who looked like a shadow with horns. His eyes glowed orange, and seeing him scared me a lot. He was ringing a bunch of bells for something, but I tried to ignore him and go back to sleep. Then I heard a knock on the door. I went down to see who it was. But when I got to the door, someone stuck a card through our mail slot and ran off really quickly. The card had a picture of a monster who had bull legs, a tail, and horns on a scary-looking goat head that looked half human. I was so scared that it was a thing in the street, but I didn't know what to do. I think I know what it is, but I hope I'm wrong. I showed the card to my dad, and he said it was Krampus. The bottom of the card said, Groß von Krampus. Daddy says every year that Krampus punishes bad boys and girls on Christmas. But Santa gives good boys and girls toys. So now that I'm not scared, I always get toys on Christmas, so I must be a good kid. I still don't tell him about the thing in the street. December 24th, 2013. My parents will be gone for most of tonight and Christmas morning tomorrow for some stupid work thing they both have. We usually have a Christmas at 6, but we have to wait for Mommy and Daddy to get home first. My mom told Brad, my oldest brother, that we have a babysitter because she didn't trust him to watch all 5 of us by himself. My mom often let Brad watch us, but we had broke a lot of things the last time we were left home alone, so Mommy said she would get Rebecca to watch us. Rebecca came to the house at 5. She was very pretty and Brad couldn't stop staring at her. Mommy and Daddy left a couple minutes after Rebecca got here. This was the first time Rebecca had watched 6 kids at the same time before, and I don't think she knew what she was getting herself into. My youngest sister Molly, who was 3, threw a tantrum after our parents left. Levi and Garrett, my younger twin brothers, who are both 5, started fighting. Brad talked with Rebecca most of the night, and Rachel spent most of the night in her room. Mom and Dad said that we would still get gifts tomorrow, but we had to wait to open them until they got home. We made hot cocoa, but the cocoa maker is broke, so the hot chocolate burned our mouths. We all got candy canes too. Rebecca started to put us to bed at 8, and finally succeeded at 9:30. Even though she was clearly exhausted and frustrated with us, she told us she had fun and that she wouldn't have spent Christmas any other way. I woke in the middle of the night at about 11 to see a crimson moon casting a dim red glow on the winter snow. I looked out my bedroom window and I saw a red object coming towards our house, fast. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a red sleigh being pulled by reindeer. I instantly recognized it as a Santa sleigh and ran to hide on the stairs and waited for him to come down the chimney, anxiously. Out of the window to the right of our fireplace, I saw the sleigh fly overhead and heard many hooves trotting on the roof. I made sure to remain perfectly still and silent as a mouse. I waited for what felt like an eternity. White, soft footsteps echoed on the roof above me, getting closer to the chimney. I heard scuffling as ash and dust started falling from the fireplace. Soon 2 black boots landed, then the rest of jolly old Saint Nick came through the fireplace, with a bag of toys on his back. Without speaking a word, he went straight to our tree, took gifts from his bag and scattered them under our lit-up plastic evergreen, then started on the milk and cookies we left for him. I felt that I had to hold my breath the entire time I was hiding on the stairs. I couldn't believe I was spying on the real Santa Claus in my home. Eventually, he made his way over to our stockings and started putting various knickknacks and candies in our stockings. Starting with Molly, when he got to Levi, he took out a small black rock and eyed it sadly before placing it in Levi's stocking. It took me a second to realize that he gave Levi coal. I tried to stifle a laugh to the best of my abilities, but the small squeak escaped from my lips anyway. Santa turned around and scanned the room. I remained as still as ever. He turned back to the stockings, this time keeping his back to me, and put a piece of coal in Garrett's stocking too. He put a candy cane in Brad's stocking along with a pocket knife. Rachel got a new phone and some Kit Kats. Finally, he moved to my stocking, which is always furthest to the right, even though I'm the middle child. He began rummaging through his sack as I leaned forward excitedly to see what presents I was getting. Santa pulled out a large jet black piece of coal and stuffed it into my stocking. I felt a wave of anger, sadness, and regret all at once. I almost stood up right there to tell off the jolly old elf, but when he turned around I saw tears in his eyes. He looked as if he was filled with similar emotions as I was. Like he didn't like to give bad kids coal. It was for this reason that I remained quiet as Santa climbed back up my chimney, got into a sleigh, and flew away. I watched out my downstairs window as the sleigh flew from the roof and into the black abyss of Christmas night. I sat there, still in place for a very long time, pondering how it could be better next year, when I spotted something out of the window again. It looked like the same figure I'd seen before, but this time the sleigh looked as if it was black. I wrote it off as it was really dark outside, except for the moon's red glow. I wondered why Santa would come back. Maybe he forgot something. Maybe he made a mistake. Maybe I wasn't naughty, and he made his way back right now to fix his mistake. My mind was racing from one thought to another as I began to hype myself up for all possible Christmas presents. I'd stopped watching the window, and I had began to daydream about the next morning, until the hooves on the roof interrupted my thoughts. I heard loud, heavy clacking this time as he got closer to the chimney. Ash began to fall down the chimney, creating an ashy cloud around the fireplace as what I assumed to be Santa began coming down and landed with a loud crash. My final thought before seeing what came next was, how was no one noticed of all this? Through the cloud of thick, black ash protruded two large horns with stripes of red and white, like those of candy canes. As the dust settled, the rest of the figure was revealed. He was pale, icy-looking blue. His beard was like Santa's except it was black and came to a point. His nose was long. His face looked grizzled, but more human than I thought. His horn looked like they'd touch the ceiling if he jumped. His body looked human in shape, but animal in appearance. His legs were twisted and ended in hooves, like that of a cow or a bull. He had a long tail. His torso was contorted, and everything but his face and palms were covered in fur. He had broken chains around his wrist, and what looked like heavy red Christmas ornaments attached to his tail by another chain. His eyes were pointed, and so were his yellow teeth. Despite his horrid, outlandish appearance, the most noticeable things about the creature were his bells that it wore, and the basket on its back that had the limp arm of a child hanging from it. The stories were true, and so is Krampus. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had seen sleighs go by, magic reindeer fly overhead, and had even seen Santa Claus himself, but none of that could have prepared me for the beast that is Krampus. He moved around the room with such speed that I was caught off guard. This thing looked about 8 feet tall without its horns, and with them he towered over everything in our large home. He made his way to the fireplace and took the coal from Levi's stocking. He rolled it around in his long, bony fingers for a moment, then took the coal from Garrett's stocking, then finally mine. He studied the coal for a moment. A wide smile full of pointy yellow teeth beamed across his face.
Now, you little children.
I heard it say in a cold, raspy voice. A shiver ran up my spine as it spoke. I was paralyzed in both fear and awe at the creature that roamed my living room beneath me. I thought he was moving towards the tree, but it walked. It started going down the hallway into Levi and Garrett's room. I remember things my father used to say about it, that he whips bad kids, takes them away, sometimes eats them. Sometimes he shakes them and scares them into being good. All these horrid thoughts and more danced through my head, as the monster creeped into the twins' room. I tried to scream with all my might, but no sound would escape my mouth. As I finally was able to choke out, "Levi! Garrett!" screams had already filled their room. Levi came running out of his room screaming his head off as Garrett followed suit. The creature's long, twisted arm reached from the room and grabbed Garrett's leg, pulling him back into the room. I stood up from my spot on the stairs and motioned for Levi to come to me. Garrett's screams fell silent. The Krampus emerged from the room alone. His nose seemed shorter now, his face even more deformed now. I gripped Levi's hand tightly, and we ran for Brad's room. I wailed on his door again and again, but he wouldn't come out. I would have tried harder to get his attention, but I could hear it coming up the stairs as each hoof hit each step. I took Levi to the laundry room and told him to hide in the laundry chute. Once he was inside, I began lowering the laundry hamper so he could get downstairs without confronting the monster. Before he was lowered out of sight, I told Levi to go start the hot cocoa maker, because I had a plan. He nodded, and once he got to the bottom, I felt the hamper get lighter as he climbed out. I heard the hooved footsteps getting louder and closer to the laundry room. I began pulling the laundry hamper up and climbed in, just as the door was violently flung open, despite the locks on it. The beast licked his lips with his long, skinny tongue as he slowly approached my trembling body inside the hamper. I began to bounce myself and rock the hamper as Krampus got closer and closer. The hamper wouldn't fall no matter how hard I rocked it, and the creature was nearly upon me. I felt its breath on me as it excitedly panted, getting further. I expected its breath to be hot, like that of a dog's, but instead it felt like the coldest winter chill, caressing my skin. I shook the hamper as savagely as I could before it finally budged. The hamper fell, and before I knew it, I was on the first floor. I crawled out of the chute and ran to the kitchen as the demon rampaged upstairs. As I came to the kitchen, I noticed no signs of my little brother, but I did see that the hot cocoa maker was on. The stomping of the creature upstairs continued, but didn't seem to be near the stairs, so I focused on finding Levi. He wasn't hiding in any cabinets, and he wasn't anywhere in the living room. I decided that he might be in his room, so I quietly crept into it slowly, but steadily. The twins' room was trashed entirely, and Levi wasn't there. There was blood on the wall. I shudder to think that it once belonged to my baby brother. A small, bloody handprint was smeared on the wall by the door. Dread was all I could feel at that moment. Dread for misbehaving all year, dread for what had become of my little brother, and dread for the silence that fell in place of hooves stomping around upstairs. I quietly and silently made my way to the kitchen and took out a large coffee pitcher of scalding hot cocoa. As I crept out of the kitchen in the living room, I had an ominous feeling of dread, as if I were being watched. I could barely see in the dark of the night, and I couldn't locate our light switches. The only source of light I had was the dim, eerie glow of the lights from the Christmas tree. As I scanned all entrances to the dining room, something moving caught my eye. The chandelier had begun to start swinging, as if something had bumped it or hit it. There was a soft thudding that accompanied the squeaking. As I looked around to make out another vague shape in the glow of the Christmas lights, I saw what bumped the chandelier. The monster was crawling on my ceiling, like a large, twisted spider. His arms were bent, looking for ways to grip the ceiling and watch me with his eyes that burned like fire. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs at the very sight of it, but instead I held my ground. A cruel smile spread across the face of the predator who was stalking me. He undug his fingers from the ceiling and landed on the floor in front of me, with a thunderous crash, mere inches away from me. This was his mistake. I threw the entire pitcher of burning hot cocoa in his face, and the beast immediately began writhing in agony. He covered his hands over his quickly blistering face. He took his hands off his face as it began to melt and peel off, the bits of flesh and blood melting away to reveal his horrible skull, with its eyes still in their sockets. It froze for a while, and for a brief moment, I was happily assured and content that the Krampus was dead. But then it only started cackling an awful, disturbingly malevolent laugh. It pierced my ears like knives, and it loomed over me to instill as much fear as it could. It was working. Before my very eyes, the muscles around the creature's skull started to grow back, and in seconds, its new face had formed. It looked more like a goat, with pointy teeth than a human, but you could still partially see it in there. Its beard was still as long as before, but now it looked almost out of place on the demonic beast head. I turned and ran behind the Christmas tree, avoiding the abomination's lanky arms as I ran by. The Krampus immediately started coming towards the tree, intent on harming me. I pushed a large plastic evergreen on the monster and ran back upstairs to find my little brother. I wailed on my other siblings' doors, but no one would wake up no matter how hard I pounded on their doors. Everyone locks their doors in their room when we go to sleep, so we're not bothered. But the doors are also heavy, and not much sounds get through them. I began to shout for Levi as loud as I could, hoping he'd respond. Then Levi appeared at the top of the stairs. We stared at each other. He looked terrified and sad. I started to walk towards him when suddenly, my baby brother was impaled by the Krampus's horns. His body thrusted up and thrashed around by the savage creature as he convulsed and shook spastically on its horns. I've seen people die on TV before, but watching it in real life is entirely different. No one should have to go through it. My brother didn't deserve that. No one deserves that. Santa and Christmas are about love and cheer. Krampus made Christmas about hatred and retribution. I watched helplessly while the thing ripped my brother's shaking body from its horns and dropped his lifeless body into the basket on his back. The demon began to strut towards me with malice intentions, so I ducked into my mom and dad's empty room and opened the top right drawer of my dad's dresser. I wasn't tall enough to see what I was reaching for, but when I felt it, I pulled out my dad's pistol. I opened the other dresser, and had put 2 bullets in the pistol by the time the creature burst open the door. I shot it twice and hit it both times, but it was unfazed by the bullets. The loud noise clearly hurt both of our ears, as the monster clawed at its ears while screaming in pain. I began to quickly crawl towards the window until something long, thin, tight, and slimy grabbed my right leg and began to pull me back. I looked behind me to my terror to see the Krampus was using his incredibly long tongue to pull me to its mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. I began to breathe in and out, quicker and quicker. It began panicking as my foot got closer to its mouth. I lifted my left leg and kicked it in the face twice before its tongue finally loosened. Before I could breathe, Krampus picked me up and began to shake me wildly. I kicked him a second time, this time with my right foot, and he flung me into the hallway before I began limping away. I had reached the end of the hallway when I heard a loud popping crack sound. Moments before feeling a sharp sting across my back. I looked back and saw that the holiday devil had whipped me with a whip, like a lion tamer would use. I felt the warm ooze on my back as a new pain started setting in. I started to limp away to safety when I was picked up by Krampus again. His long, cold fingers wrapped around my back and stung my cut even worse. He looked at me, right in the eye, before lifting me behind him and dropping me into the birch basket on his back. On the outside of the basket, it looks like it could only fit a couple of kids inside, but the inside was massive. I fell into a mountain of bodies. There were hundreds or thousands of kids in one basket, piled onto each other, not all alive. Where you couldn't see other kids, which made up the trembling ground, you only saw darkness. No sounds could be heard from inside, or outside really. Either kids would scream, mutter, shout, until their throats clearly hurt, but no sounds came from their mouths. Every time I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, it got worse. I waited for what felt like a millennia to escape, as new kids would fall in and join the confusion to show how much time passed. Eventually, the Krampus reached into the basket and began to pull out another child. His arm became longer as he reached into the basket and stretched out to get a panicked girl. I grabbed onto her leg and let myself be carried to salvation. When we were pulled from the basket, I let go of the kid and fell behind Krampus. He didn't notice I escaped. He was too focused on the girl. He looked at the small girl a second before biting into her flesh with his large, sharp teeth. I never knew the kid's name before the creature devoured her, but I owe her my life for helping me escape. I backed away slowly from behind Krampus as he feasted on my fellow child at its dinner table. I had no idea where I was now, but it was dark and it was cold. I think it's where the creature lives. After the monster finished eating, he picked up a small wooden box. opened the top, and spat something that glowed a bright green into it. He then took the box over to a rusted door that he opened and entered, then left a few minutes later without the box. Then he left the room, leaving the child's remains on a large platter and a rusty door to my curiosity. I opened the door to see dozens of more wooden boxes. I also saw how many creepy-looking porcelain dolls and other toys. The door behind me was closed, and I was immersed in total darkness. I got out my phone and used it to barely light my way. I walked past a jack-in-the-box with a scary face. I walked past a baby doll that looked withered and old. I found a sack doll that looked like a creepy, rotting skeleton too. I thought it was like Santa's rejected toy shop until I found the word misfit, smeared in red paint, next to a clown with a skull for a head, blue eyes in its socket, and big, fleshy hands. I was terrified someone else was caught in that room before. When I got closer to the clown, it jumped towards me and yelled,
Wanna play?
I got really scared and jumped back as the clown let out a scary laugh. I heard scurrying and tiny footsteps from the other toys all around. I started catching the dolls and gingerbread men turning their heads as I ran along the walls, trying to relocate the door. I found another message on the wall. Why can't we die? Was scratched into the wall by something. I wanted nothing more than for this night to end. When I located the door, I bolted for it as soon as I saw it. But I was tripped by a toy soldier with realistic burns on half of his face. I kicked the tiny hunk of plastic away and moved closer to the door, when a deformed baby doll appeared from the darkness and sank her teeth into my leg. I felt a surge of pain and fell to the ground. I furiously punched the doll's head repeatedly until it unlocked its teeth from my flesh. The porcelain atrocity scurried off as the other horrible toys danced around me in the darkness. More and more of them kept popping out and coming out of boxes, like the one the Krampus spat out the glowing thing into. And the toys began muttering words, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The muttering got louder and louder until I understood some of their words. Feel our pain. He killed us, but not entirely. He globbed me up and spat out my soul into a puppet. Kill us. Let us die. The things they said were terribly dreadful, to say the least. I got up and started making my way towards the door, as the dolls chanted more obscure things. We're gonna eat you alive like he ate us. I'm gonna rip out your eyes. Although they continued to chant, none of them came towards me again, as I moved around the dark room. I saw a small toy skeleton in Santa's clothes, with the beard move by. A puppet with many nails sticking out of its wooden head strung up to the ceiling, moving and wrestling around its strings. I spotted a stool that was pulled onto a workbench, with tools and a teddy bear on it. The teddy bear had real bear claws sticking from its paws, and real human teeth in its mouth. I reasoned that this was Krampus' demented toy shop, and decided to leave before it was too late. I walked past the bench to the door, and started pulling on the rusty metal handle. The door was extremely heavy, but slowly budged and started opening as I pulled back with all my might. Light began to bathe the room, and the misfit toys dashed to the shadows to avoid the light. I ran from the dark room, closed the door behind me, and leaned on it for a while to catch my bearings. I looked around at the only other room in this place that was familiar to me. I went by the long table the monster ate the nameless girl at, trying not to think about it. Trying to think of something, anything to distract me from the horrors I had bared witness to on the most unsuspecting and happiest time of year. I walked to an open door and poked only half my head out to scan the perimeter of the room. It led to a large room that had various whips, saws, and various other torture devices. I crept in and kept to the wall. I spotted 3 dark wooden doors amongst the darkness and concrete walls. I also found a window, and the snow was falling outside so slowly, so peacefully. 2 doors were on one large wall, opposite of the window, and the other was on the wall to the right of the window. I first tried one of the doors on the long wall, but had decided beforehand to go to the door right of the window, thinking it would lead me closer to the door, or something. The walls were lined with racks, and racks were lined with hellish masks. Some had horns, some had long serpent tongues sticking out, some had teeth, some had patches of skin, some had antlers. One was a wired skull with antlers, and the antlers had lit candles on them. It was so strange. The room was so large. And the other door led to the same room. I left without moving the door, in fear that closing the heavy door will create noise and lead the creature to me. I walked along the sidewalk to avoid the equipment, straight to the only door I had left. I opened the door slowly and with caution. The first thing in the room I noticed was a strange tree that looked like an upside-down purple Christmas tree. The trunk was on the bottom, but the pine and branches looked upside down. The tree was decorated with red and green lights and small bones. There was another window in this room, but it was on the same side as the last. There was an open doorway that led to the hallway, and that teed off the two signs labeled in the directions. The right one said surveillance room, and the left one said stables. I went to the stables thinking I might be able to find a reindeer to fly out of this place with. It seems like a silly plan now in hindsight. I opened the stable door, and awful smells invaded my nostrils immediately. There was frost on the floor as well. There were 8 stables lined up along the wall to the right, each with a demonic reindeer head sticking out. Below each head was the doors to each stall, each with pendants of names on them. I read the names out loud as I started going down the row. Each deer was grotesque in their own right. 1 or 2 had exposed skulls, each had jagged teeth. Some had manes, and others had blood dripped on their fur. 7 of their eyes glowed red. Slasher, I said as I passed the first one. Wrathful, Gorgon, Putrid, Cyclops. Cyclops was missing 1 fiery eye. Rabies, Goner. The last monstrous reindeer looked like a hellish Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. His head held flames that danced from its gnarled snout to the back of its mane. Between its sharp and bloody antlers, furiously flickered bolts of electricity. I decided riding one was out of the question and began searching for an exit. I realized the only door to the room was the one that I came from. I looked all over the room for some other way, and I saw the reason for the cold. The top crease and upper part of one wall was missing and led outside. It was far too high to reach. I left the stable room and went to the surveillance room. The hinda felt icy cold as I slowly opened the door. The room was like all the rest, was large. One wall was covered with monitors. The middle monitor stuck out more than the rest and had a keyboard below it. A chair was also pulled up to it. Each screen had various kids on it, some in dreadful conditions, others minding their own business. No sound came from the monitors, but I started to notice I was hearing a ticking noise. A clock above the door I came in read 5:45, Christmas Day. Christmas didn't start at my house until 6 o'clock. The wall opposite the monitors had many names scratched into it. I wondered if the dead girl's name was scratched into the wall. A door that read, Exit, was next to the right of the monitors, but the computer said, Search name. I sat in the large chair and typed in the name, Garrett Rockford. A nutcracker that had 2 bodies attached from the sides of its head popped up. Each body seemed to be trying to yank away from the other. Its face looked like it was in pain, and it had the same color of the eyes as Levi and Garrett. I looked up Levi Rockford, and the same thing popped up. I sat frozen in awe for a moment. Tears filled my eyes and ran down my cheeks. The ticking of the clock seemed to turn into clopping as I sobbed. I was crying more than I ever cried before. I cried so hard I began hearing a ringing. Then the chair I was in spun around and I was face to face with the Krampus. He looked menacing and sinister. His horns were partly covered in blood. His long fingers looked sharp and his eyes burned like never before. He waved his long, sharp, bony finger at me and said,
Naughty, naughty.
He said cruelly and mockingly. He licked his face with his incredibly long tongue, then began to wrap it around my throat. He started constricting his tongue and choked me. I was gurgling and coughing and struggling. I started feeling weaker and weaker as my head heated up and my lungs screamed for air. My vision even started to become blurred. Then I knew if I didn't do something quickly, I was going to die. I punched him in the face with all my might and kicked him back for a brief moment as his tongue recoiled into his mouth. I utilized my time and ran toward the exit. I felt the ground shake directly behind me as heavy hooves shook the floor violently in their wake. I felt the creature's cool breath on the back of my neck. I pushed the door open and ran into the freezing cold as my pursuer followed suit. I ran until I was knee-deep in snow, until a lanky hand gripped me and started dragging me back. The dark sky slowly lit as the sun started to emerge from the bottom horizon. The Krampus stopped dragging me. He dropped me and stared briefly at the rising sun.
I'll come get you again.
He said as he dropped my leg and retreated to his lair as I laid in the snow. A silhouetted figure came from the distance. I closed my eyes for what felt like seconds, but when I opened my eyes, the sun was higher in the sky, and the figure was closer. I could make out that he was wearing red. Then I passed out again. I opened my eyes to see an outstretched hand with a black mitten on it. It belonged to a fat bearded man with a silky hat. Santa? I inquired. Shh, child, he said in a soft, soothing voice. Let's take you home. The next thing I remember was waking up in my bed at home. Levi and Garrett were kidnapped in the middle of the night. I found out from Rebecca, Brad, and Molly, who already told our parents and the cops. I tried to tell them what really happened, but no one would believe me. They only got mad at me when I tried to explain it, so I gave up on trying to tell them. That's how I spent my Christmas. Miss Daphne Smothers was an 83-year-old who lived by herself with a cat. Her husband had passed away 2 years prior, and her children have grown up and left the nest. But come Christmas time, Miss Smothers gets her joy whenever her grandchildren pay a visit. She saw the looks on their faces whenever she served them Christmas cookies and other pleasantries. This Christmas, she made some sweet and salty bark and kept it on the kitchen table. She found herself sitting down in her favorite chair knitting a scarf when there came a sharp knock at the door. She jumped a bit, not expecting any visitors at the moment. Can we come in? Smithers inactively laid the scarf on the arm of the sofa and gripped the chair. Her frail bones popped and shifted, getting up from the chair. Smithers collected her walking stick and trudged tightly towards the front door. Another sharp knock rang out, that time more agitated than previously. I'm coming, hold on, Smithers yelled. She grasped the doorknob and turned it counterclockwise. The door creaked open. On the other end of the door were 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy appeared older, presumably around 13. He wore a denim hoodie and gray pants. He was holding the hand of the 8-year-old girl who was wearing a blue dress with lace. For whatever reason, the children had their heads bowed, looking at their feet. The boy repeated his question. Can we come in? Smithers scratched her head. It was at 10 p.m. Why would these children be at our house at this time of night? Somehow, the boy must have realized what she was thinking. We need to borrow your phone. My cell phone battery is dead. Smithers thought more about the suddenness of having these unexpected guests, but they were children regardless. At the very least, she could grant them this one request. She nodded her head, gesturing the 2 children in. Smithers directed them into the living room, where her cat awoke from the ruckus. When the cat set its eyes on the 2 mysterious children, the cat arched its back and hissed. Smithers walked over to silence the cat. Shh! Lex, these are our guests. Behave yourself. The cat meowed in defeat before running out of the living room into the kitchen. The 2 children sat on the sofa, their eyes still hidden. Smithers went into the kitchen and pulled out the plate of sweet and salty bark. She would turn into the living room and bent down to the children's eye levels. Care for some sweets? The boy looked up. There was a good reason as to why he was shielding his eyes. They were devoid of color or pupils. Nothing more than pitch black nothingness. Whatever he assuredly was not of the earthly realm. The girl looked up as well. Her eyes matched the coal blackness of the older boy. And what was the most bizarre was Smithers smirked at the children, despite the hollow sockets that they call eyes. The children were speechless at first. They shared a puzzled glare. The girl waved her hand in front of Smithers' face. But Smithers didn't follow the path of it. They leaned in closer, realizing that Smithers' eyes were glazed over a thin shade of blue. She was blind. Smithers suddenly frowned. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't care for them? Thank you, the boy said. He took a piece of the sweet and salty bark and broke it in his hand before passing the girl a piece. Their heavy teeth ground down on the sweets. Oddness aside, the 2 children couldn't help but bask in the sweetness and saltiness of the snack. They indulged themselves in more of the sweets before getting up. They looked at the decorations with curiosity. On top of the fireplace was a stand, a small replica of a nativity scene. From her mental notes, She figured that 2 children had stopped at the fireplace. "Isn't it such a lovely display?" she asked. "Do you know the story of Christmas?" "We know about your Jesus," the boy responded. "Our ancestors spoke a lot about him." Confused by this statement, Smithers nevertheless allowed the 2 children to further marvel at the Christmas decorations. The girl rustled the Christmas tree, causing the ornaments to fall on the ground. She ceased when she sensed Smithers getting upset. The 2 children played with the nutcrackers and listened to Christmas songs. The hours edged by slowly, until a sudden electrical surge generated through the house. The 2 children looked at each other and looked back at Smithers. "We have to go now. Our parents are here." Bright light shined through the windows. Outside was a spherical, smooth craft standing on 3 legs. A large, skinny-looking creature exited the craft and stood there at the door. The 2 children collected a plate of sweet and salty bark and exited through the front door. There came a sound of a large whistle, as if there were 1,000 steam engines situated outside. Within a flash, the craft was gone. Smithers called out for the 2 children, only to be met by a great silence. She closed the door and returned to her knitting. The evil god made houses of his flesh just for fun. The evil god ate them with pleasure. They feared the evil god who had made them, only to devour them later. No one wanted to be picked for the next cruel experiment the evil god had in mind for them. It's a cruel world the evil god had created for them, and all the gingerbread people knew it. I had an unusual visitor on Christmas Day 2008, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Santa Claus passing by my house in Bloomington, Indiana. The day started in typical fashion with the opening of gifts around the Christmas tree. I served an early Christmas dinner for my family and friends, and everybody departed by 5 p.m., except my sister and brother-in-law who lived with me. They were sleeping in a bedroom at the end of the hall with the door open. I went into my bedroom with my dog Toby, and I shut the door securely. I was just dozing off when I heard the latch on my bedroom door open. I waited several seconds for my sister or brother-in-law to ask me whatever they came to say, but there was no other sound, and it was almost 7 p.m., so my bedroom was pitch black, and I saw nothing. I had left the lights on in the kitchen and in the bathroom, and there were tons of Christmas lights in the living room, so the hallway would have been well lit. I would have been able to see whoever was at the door just by lifting my head. I pushed the blankets down and lifted my head from the pillow, but just as I would have been able to see who was in the doorway, an extremely bright light hit me right in the eyes. I shielded my eyes and yelled, "Turn out that fucking light! You're blinding me!" The light immediately disappeared, and I heard the bedroom door latch close. My bedside light is a touch lamp, so I tapped it on and looked around the bedroom. There was no one in the bedroom except me and Toby. Toby jumped off the bed and went to the door without showing any signs of alarm. At first I was frightened because Toby is a Dutch Shepherd, well trained to be an excellent watchdog and proven a personal protection dog. Since Toby was already up, I decided to let him outside and see what sis or brother-in-law needed. When I went to the hallway, I could see both of them still in bed. I took Toby to the living room to let him outside, and there was nobody there either. So, who opened my door and turned a spotlight on my face? Like most people, the thoughts of loved ones are always close at hand during the holiday season. When I first went to lie down, I was thinking of how happy I was with my small family, how we all had enjoyed a pleasant Christmas. It would have been so much better if my mother and brother were still alive to spend it with us. I would like to think it was my brother's spirit stopping by to say, "Merry Christmas, I still think of you too." I haven't been able to debunk this strange event or find any logical explanation. I'm half afraid that my heart stopped during my sleep and the light I saw was a bright light people report of after near-death experiences. Leave it to me to see the stairway of heaven and ruin my chance at external paradise by saying, "Turn out that fucking light." I've made a mental note that if I ever see another bright light, to clean up my language, just in case. My mother, to whom I was very close, passed away in 1964 when I was 17 years old. I left home that year and moved from Ontario to Nova Scotia. In 1969, I met a girl whom I would call Karen, and we got married in the March of 1970. In December of 1971, we were expecting our first child. We were living in a small one-half bedroom bungalow. There was a fireplace in the living room. My wife and I loved that fireplace, and we had it lit every night. It was Christmas Eve 1971, and we had just finished putting gifts under the tree. And the nice fire gave off a beautiful glow. On the tree, one string of lights, which was supposed to flash, had stopped working several days before. It was 5 minutes to midnight when the fireplace suddenly just went out, and the string of lights started to flash, and the other lights stopped flashing. My wife and I were sitting on the floor, and it became very chilly in the room. I looked over to my lazy boy chair, and I saw a figure sitting there, my mother, with a big, beautiful smile on her face. My wife, who had never met my mother, said she could see the same thing. This ghost never spoke, but just kept looking at me and my wife and smiling. At 12 midnight, the fire in the fireplace started up again, and the lights on the tree stopped flashing, and the others started flashing again. I looked over in the chair, and the ghost was gone. No matter what I did to those Christmas lights, they never flashed again. My parents and I lived in a small home that was around 90 years old. The year would have been 1996. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old to the time I was 19. From the very day that we moved in, I felt that I was not alone. One year, around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heat had just shut off briefly, and she and I were sitting in the living room watching television when the temperature suddenly dropped. As I rose to turn up the heat, the Christmas tree began to shake violently. Ornaments were falling off right and left, and she and I were terrified. We ran upstairs to lay on my bed. My white cat curled up with us, and my door was open slightly. When I gazed out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall white figure run down the hall. I turned to my friend, and she acknowledged that she had seen the exact same thing. She never spent the night ever again. It was Christmas time of 1995, or 96, at my aunt's house on a reservation in North Dakota. Some of my family was in the living room watching television, and the kids were in their rooms or sleeping. And my uncle's aunt and I were sitting at the table putting a puzzle together. My cousin, who worked at a casino, would come home around midnight or 1 a.m. This night, as she pulled up and was walking toward the house, she looked in the window and saw me sitting at the table, my aunt sitting across from me, and someone standing to the left of me, and someone standing in the corner. So she continued to walk in the house, thinking nothing of it. As we were sitting there talking, she looked at me and asked who was standing next to me a few minutes ago, and who was in the corner. I told her no one, and she said, "Yeah, there was someone standing next to you. It looked like it was your mom, and she was playing with your hair." She said this person was running her hand through my hair, like a mother does to a child. It kind of freaked me out, being I was probably only 12 or 13 at the time. My cousin swears up and down that someone was standing over me, rubbing my head, and watching me put the puzzle together with my aunt and uncle. And that there was another person behind this person. We got around to thinking it was probably her mom she saw. Her mom passed away a week before Christmas in 1992. In my family, we consider our aunts and uncles to be just like our moms and dads. After thinking it could have been her, it didn't scare me so much. However, we couldn't figure out who the person was standing in the corner. And always around Christmas time, something strange would always happen. And we just think it's her visiting us.